El Paso, Dayton, Parkland, Las Vegas, Orlando, Sutherland Springs, Christchurch, Poway, Charleston, Pittsburgh, Gilroy, St. Louis, Virginia Beach, etc. The cities across America and in Christchurch, New Zealand, that I just named are simply the mass shootings that I can name off the top of my head without looking up recent mass shootings. When I did search for the log of recent mass shootings where at least 3 people were killed, the list in the past few years, the list was too long to recite. But that shouldn't keep us from knowing that so many of those lives could have been saved if we actually had any kind of sane gun control in America. Even the Rupert Murdoch-owned New York Post came out with a headline over the past weekend, and after the recent shootings in Gilroy, California, El Paso, and Dayton, Ohio, saying ban weapons of war. To be fair, this isn't the first time that the New York Post has had a similar headline. They have called for this before, and Murdoch himself has called for the banning of assault weapons in the past. But that goes to show you how stupefying it is that Republicans and the right are so cowardly to the base of their support that is becoming more and more a danger to themselves and the rest of us who want to be able to have our political views, our votes, our peaceful protests, and our democracy be secure without the fear of a crazy young white guy likely radicalized by the Trump supporting white supremacist groups like the KKK and whoever else spin off the Daily Stormer, those kind of bullshit people. Or in the case of one shooter, I think in the one in Poway, California, ironically was obsessed. He happened to be obsessed with the right's quote-unquote new voice, Ben Shapiro, a Jewish American male who is spewing and validating the racist, xenophobic, Hitler-esque rhetoric coming from their president, Donald Trump. Not my president, their president. And because he is Jewish, because he says the things that they like to hear while wearing a yarmulke, they think it's okay to do these things and say these things. That's literally what it is with Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro is a fraud. He's a little weasel. All he does is talk fast. That's it. If you ever slow down his debates, you'll see how absolutely just ridiculously illogical they are. But I digress. I myself am a young white American male, and every single time the news of a mass shooter breaks, I can almost bet my life on it that the shooter is going to look like I do. Just like the Republican Party as a body of Congress, where after the 2020 election, less than 10% of the Republican House members will be women, and the rest of its makeup is almost entirely white men. So just like the shooters mostly being white men, that is exactly how the Republican Party is. There's no diversity among either of them. These are so simple to connect the dots, but nobody's doing it on the right. The only time you'll ever hear about a non-white male mass shooter is when the shooting occurs, like the one at YouTube headquarters a year or two ago, where a Middle Eastern or Persian woman carried out that attack. And almost always, like those work-related ones, those grievances, those types of shootings are very rarely, or at least not always, done with the assault rifles or weapons of war. Some are, but those seem to be done more with the handguns and not related to any kind of hate speech rhetoric or white supremacy like we're seeing in today. Which brings me to my next point. The Second Amendment, and at least the way that I was taught it, was literally in place in the Constitution for the unlikely event that the people's government started getting out of control, becoming a dictatorship, a fascist, or military-run regime, and therefore the Constitution says, quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So it really isn't even about self-protection, which is a huge misconception. It's really about the people being able to take back their government if it gets out of control, to take back their country if it gets out of control. Yet, this is, the Constitution, it's in the Constitution for people to have the ability to overthrow the very type of government that the Trump administration is constantly and daily teetering on. And yet, because the right wing is so unbelievably relentless with their propaganda, their Fox News, their Breitbart, their Rush Limbaugh, their Sean Hannity, other right-wing talk radio, probably 90% of the right is completely brainwashed and is blind to this reality. That they, the people who claim to know the Second Amendment the most, are just totally oblivious and hysterically hypocritical, especially over the past few years. This podcast isn't going to be very long, but I'm going to end it with a simple mathematical explanation as it pertains to exactly what we on the left want when we say we want gun control. Because we aren't dumb enough to think that shootings won't keep happening. We aren't dumb enough to think that criminals are not going to continue to be able to get guns fairly easily. And we are not going to take your guns away. We might do a gun buyback program, but for the most part, in our realistic world, we would grandfather every gun that is out there now in. And then, the way we would save lives over the course of the next century is by banning those weapons of war. Banning guns that have no other purpose than to mow down enemy soldiers in combat during a war. Banning guns that aren't used for hunting. I mean, you don't need a AK-47 or AR-15 for hunting. If you do, you're a weak hunter. We will save lives by banning anything and everything that is or is like a bump stock, an extended magazine, anything that makes a gun able to fire quicker than its original manufactured rate, and anything that makes a gun able to fire more bullets before reloading than its original manufactured capacity. And we're talking over the course of the next half century or century, over countless of lives that would be saved if we implemented these types of sane, broadly supported gun control. Boils down to this: less bullets flying through the air means less people being killed. That is all we are talking about. Just think about it. If we let's say every single mass shooting that we've talked about or seen over the past decade, it still happened, but was done with these hypothetical gun control measures in place, and were not able to be carried out using weapons of war, had no modifications or anything, would more or less people be dead right now? I'll give you a second to answer. The answer is no, less people. And anyone who wants to argue with me on this can try, but I am right. You are wrong. The end. This was recorded on August 7th, 2019. Thanks for tuning in. This is Brandon. I'm out.